Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. Winnipeg police revealed today the body of another First Nations woman has been found at the city's Brady landfill. APTN's Leanne Sanders reports.
A Winnipeg Police Service news conference started with this warning.
Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that there are details that may be disturbing to members of the public, particularly those directly impacted by matters involving missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit, and gender-diverse people.
And then, the startling news, another woman has been found dead at the Brady Road landfill.
Yesterday at approximately 3 p.m., the Winnipeg Police Service was notified by staff at the Brady landfill site that a deceased person was located in an active area of the facility.
The woman has been identified as 33-year-old Linda Mary Beardy of Winnipeg and originally from the Lake St. Martin area. Major Crimes Inspector Sean Pike says her death is a homicide, but would not go into details.
But I can confirm at this time we have no information to suggest that there are any other victims or that this investigation is related to any previous incidents.
Pike also confirms that investigators believe Beardy's remains got to the landfill on a garbage truck and were found within a few hours. The partial remains of Rebecca Contois were found at the same landfill, and it is believed the remains of two other women are in a private landfill outside the city. Jeremy Skibicki has been charged in connection with those deaths, and that of an unidentified woman known only as Buffalo Woman. The landfill is on operational pause while the identification unit continues to work at the scene. Cambria Harris, the daughter of one of Skibicki's victims, posted a simple message on social media. Search the landfills for all remains. An online petition calling for a search is at nearly 18,000 signatures. A feasibility study into a landfill search is underway by a joint committee of police and Indigenous leaders, and this discovery will no doubt add to the urgency. Leanne Sanders, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Now to the tale of two northern BC communities brought together by amalgamation in the 1950s. That has led to a housing crisis, according to some critics. APTN's Lee Wilson has the first of a two-part story.
Woodette, or Fort Babine, was a community of abundance before amalgamation. The community is located nearly 100 kilometers north of what is now known as the town of Smithers in northern BC. For generations, they fished successfully using the weir system, a wooden structure that directs and traps fish. But in 1904, the federal government closed the weirs on Lake Babine due to the impacts on the salmon stream. Fred William is a Woodette elder. He has worked as a member of their treaty team. He says in 1957, federal Indian agents, including one named Damaris, combined two bands, Old Fort Babine and Fort Babine, into Lake Babine Nation to make travel and administration easier.
He amalgamated Old Fort Band, which is our neighboring band, and Fort Babine Band, our parent band. This is our mother reserve.
William says the people of the smaller Fort Babine were pressured to move by the government. They were also offered jobs in nearby sawmills.
You move out, you can get a job. You can, so they did. But what about us that stayed behind? We stayed behind because we believe that this is our land, because we believe in our titles and rights.
Many Fort Babine members moved to Ione Reserve in Burns Lake, which now has nearly 1,000 residents. Others chose to stay in Fort Babine, which now has an estimated 60 members on reserve.
All of a sudden we became the outland community. And that Burns Lake Reserve, they were encroaching on Burns Lake Band Reserve, and they became the main office, and we became the satellite. Yet everything's so backwards.
I'm just getting tired of this.
Robbie Reed is one of two councillors for Fort Babine, part of the Lake Babine Nation. He shared Fort Babine members have been raising concerns about a mounting housing crisis. He says for decades they've been asking Lake Babine Nation for renovations or new housing.
I've been pushing for stuff for, asking this, we need things done, housing, but we don't have any control over it.
Calls to Lake Babine Nation have not been answered. For the last 11 years, Bessie West has been a councillor for Fort Babine. She is concerned for the community and believes their way of life is being impacted.
Even more diminished. Our services are disappearing. Our school is open 4 days a week, not 5 days a week. And all those decisions was made for us. We never ask.
Lee Wilson, APTN National News, Fort Babine.
And Lee will have part 2 of this story tomorrow. A small First Nation in BC is taking on the provincial government over what they are calling a colonial practice of granting mines access without consent. Tina House has more.
Leaders of the Gitxaala Nation are in Vancouver to fight for their inherent Indigenous rights in Supreme Court. They oppose what they see as an archaic Mineral Tenure Act. With the click of a mouse and $25, anyone can buy a hectare of land at $1.75 per hectare for mining purposes. According to the Gitxaala Nation, no consent or consultation is required with the nation, and no notification is sent saying that their traditional territory is being mined. West Coast environmental law lawyer Jessica Clogg says the act is unjust.
As if their inherent rights, their inherent title, their ayok, their laws did not exist. Gitxaala says that this was a breach of the Crown's constitutional duties to Gitxaala and did not align with the human rights standards set out in the UN Declaration, including the standard of free, prior, and informed consent.
Banks Island is located near Haida Gwaii and Prince Rupert. The Gitxaala consider it within their traditional territory. Banks Island is the site of the Yellow Giant gold mine, which failed to get environmental assessment in 2015. The mine later went on to pollute toxic tailings in salmon-bearing water bodies around the island, leading to charges that forced them into bankruptcy. According to the chief counselor of the Gitxaala Nation, Linda Ennis, the damage is still felt to this day.
Gitxaala people have lived with the consequences of bad mining practices for years. Prospecting camps and mining operations polluting our lakes and salmon streams, impacting our resources, our medicine, and our people for generations to come.
And as the leaders of the Gitxaala march down the street towards BC Supreme Court for their first day of hearings, many here are hopeful that the court will rule in their favor. Jamie Neen is with Mining Watch Canada. He says this is an important case that he also hopes will set precedent in how governments should respect Indigenous rights and title.
We're hopeful that it will be a game changer, really. I mean, we're looking at something called free entry, which is the principle that mining can go anywhere it wants in the country. And that's been challenged in a number of jurisdictions, and it's been modified, shall we say, in the Northwest Territories, in Quebec, and Ontario. It hasn't really been tackled in BC, and it certainly has not been brought up to the standard of free, prior, informed consent.
And for the next 2 weeks, the BC Supreme Court will hear from the Gitxaala Nation. We'll keep you updated as this case evolves. Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
We reached out to the BC government, who said in part they would not be commenting on this issue as it is before the courts, and that they plan to modernize the Act in consultation with First Nations. The Assembly of First Nations turned its attention to the revised child welfare compensation deal today. That story and more coming up after the break. Welcome back. It's day 2 of the Assembly of First Nations Special Chiefs Assembly in Ottawa. First Nations child welfare was at the top of today's agenda. Here's Annette Francis with highlights.
It's an agreement decades in the making, the final settlement on compensation for First Nations child welfare, something Cindy Blackstock has worked on since 2007. She spoke just before the chiefs voted on the revised deal.
So where is the next step? Well, it's your decision. You're the rights holders. You're going to make the decision about whether or not this is right for your children and families for compensation. That's the first and most important step.
The deal is worth $3 billion more than the original one agreed to in 2022. The negotiations for compensation started after a 2016 Canadian Human Rights Tribunal ruling. It found that Canada discriminated by underfunding First Nations children in care compared to the same services offered to off-reserve children. In 2022, the tribunal halted a $20 billion compensation agreement, saying it left out some children. Therefore, the new deal is $3 billion more. Once the revised draft resolution was read, Chief Derek Nepanak spoke of its importance.
Particularly important that Manitoba has a voice in this conversation, being that we're the epicenter of children's poverty in Canada, and probably the epicenter of children's apprehension in Canada and possibly throughout other colonial states within the British Empire. We have experienced for decades children being apprehended, broken hearts and trails of tears leading to this very important day.
Following a number of remarks from chiefs and clarification, the vote proceeded and passed unanimously.
Any abstentions? I see none. And let's not forget our sign language. I see none. Resolution is carried. Thank you very much.
The endorsement was no surprise to Tyendinaga Chief Don Miracle.
Well, I expected that the resolution would be passed with the additional $3 billion for the settlement. It's increased from $20 billion to $23 billion, and a lot of First Nations people who have been taken into care by Children's Aid are waiting for the settlement to be approved and the funds to be distributed.
AFN Regional Chief Bobby Cameron said it's been a long time coming and is pleased with the decision.
We're glad this happened, and we hope it flows out a lot sooner than later.
If all goes as planned, the process to make a claim will begin in late 2023 or early 2024. Tomorrow, the chiefs will focus on a response to the federal government's UNDRIP action plan. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Two sisters who have claimed Inuit identity and access funding intended for Indigenous students are now being questioned. Our online journalist Danielle Pardy broke the story. She spoke to Daryl Stranger earlier.
Danielle, thanks so much for being here. It's always a pleasure having you on our news show. Now, on Friday, you came out with an interesting story and a really great story about two twins who have received money in scholarships. Can you give us a quick overview of the story?
Yeah, absolutely. So the two sisters, the Gill sisters, Nadia and Amira, they had a bit of a soccer career as youths, particularly Nadia. So she had a lot of publicly available information that stated who her parents were, that stated a lot of information about where she came from, what she called her hometown. And so as I was looking through this story, we got a tip about two sisters who had been claiming Inuit identity who may not have been Inuit. And while I was in the middle of researching this, the Nunavut Tugnavik Inc. actually announced that they would be looking into these two further membership based on possible fraudulent claims. So it's a very interesting story. There's a lot of detail in it, but I've just brushed the surface here.
Well, as you just mentioned in the report, you mentioned the sisters have had membership with NTI. Can you tell us what we know so far about that?
Yeah, so far we know for sure that the sisters appeared on a voting roll for 2020 as voting members outside of Nunavut. According to sources, the woman who was the reason that they had membership. Her name is Kitty Noah, and she is a disabled Inuk woman. One of the sources, Barbara, spoke with her in Iqaluit, or knew her from Iqaluit. Of course, we're dealing with often quite small communities where everybody knows everybody, and so I think that's an important element to the story, is that a lot of people didn't know these sisters or know who their parents were, which is what really raised questions to begin with.
Well, so with this story, what's been the response so far?
We did get a response from the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business, and they are currently investigating. We have not yet heard back from Inspire. I hope that we do. I'm very curious if they gave the money on the basis of the Nunavut membership, or if there was something else, or if there was self-declaration. That doesn't appear to be the case in their policies, but there's still a lot of questions. With these sort of things, I think we hope to see more information coming out as people become aware of the story.
And Danielle, last one for you here. What's next here with this story?
I think in this sort of story as well, we expect to see some changes. This isn't the first story that we've had on people claiming Indigenous identity, and so what I think we have not seen yet, but I hope to see, is more information from the organizations. Hydro One, for example, RBC, they all gave scholarships to Amira Gill based on claims of Inuit identity. So we haven't seen a response from them, but I would like to. And I think it's also important that they tell the community what they're going to do to make sure that the money gets to the right people and the people who are truly in need, and like us Indigenous people.
Danielle, that's a great point, and again, your story is really interesting and compelling, so thanks so much for coming on and giving us a little update.
Thank you. Yeah, I would definitely encourage reading it online. There's a lot to cover.
Now, the family of Kitty Noah, who was claimed to be the twins' mother at NTI, which led to their granting of cards, released a statement today saying they do not know the Gill sisters. Time for one more quick break, but stick around. There's more to come. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. April Isidore sent in this shot of a cloudy sky over drift pile in northern Alberta as the sun continues to set over the horizon. Thanks, April. You can send your shots to share@aptn.ca for the chance to be our next photo of the day. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the east coast, +4 in Halifax, snow and 3 above in Fredericton. -8 with snow in Kuujjuaq, 3 below for Nain. 0 in Montreal, -2 in Val-d'Or. +11 in Sault Ste. Marie, 4 above for North Bay. -2 with snow in Thunder Bay, 4 below with flurries in Sioux Lookout. -3 and cloudy for God's Lake, cloudy and 0 for Norway House. -5 with snow in Winnipeg, 4 below and snow for Dauphin. -4 in Regina, 6 below in Saskatoon. Sunny and -3 in Meadow Lake, 1 below in La Ronge. Over in northern Alberta, +1 with snow in Fort Chip, 3 above with snow in Fort McMurray. 2 above with snow in Edmonton, 6 in Lethbridge. 8 above for Vancouver, cloudy, and 9 in Victoria. 6 in Prince George, 5 with snow in Dease Lake. -11 with snow in Old Crow, +2 and flurries for Whitehorse. -1 in Yellowknife, +1 in Norman Wells. 12 below with snow in Sax Harbor, -7 for Pawlatuck. -19 in Chesterfield, 20 below in Whale Cove. -26 for Resolute, 21 below in Igloolik. Gwich'in communities across the NWT and Yukon are returning to historical dog sled trails. Carly Schogner went along on the week-long Skidoo trip. She has a 2-part series on that trip.
Skidooers as young as 12 and as old as 79 cross snowy mountains and rivers en route from Fort McPherson to Old Crow. The 350-kilometer trip went through the Richardson Mountains with full 2 days of skidoo and a stop partway at the Curtin Mountain Yukon camp. Grand Chief Ken Kikavichik of the NWT Gwich'in Tribal Council said taking the trek has been on his bucket list since he was a teen. He first heard about it 31 years ago when Johnny D. Charlie organized their first event to preserve historical dog sled routes.
It's hard not to get emotional about it because we've got a lot of family members who've passed on. You see all the young people cutting wood over there. There was axes and wood flying all over the place. And in the span of a half hour, they had 3 camps set up, stocked with wood. And just seeing that that Gwich'in teamwork is really inspiring.
A crew of 7 from Yukon University tagged along for one leg. Madison Allen is from Haines Junction, and she's never taken a trek like this before.
We came here to learn the ways of the Gwich'in way, so I'm really excited to be here. It's a nice drive down. It's so beautiful going through the mountains pass.
And it isn't just a chilly trip, but part of a larger training program for land guardians and environmental monitoring. Alan describes how one course has a foot in 2 worldviews.
Well, the two-eyed seeing course is, it's like a course seeing through the Western eye in a traditional way and trying to bring them together, and so we could kind of live in harmony in a bit, so we could move forward and not backwards.
The multi-day trip for the Tetlit and Vuntut Gwich'in communities has been an annual event since 1999 after Charlie died of cancer. His niece, Elder Alice Vichurqua, went the full distance of over 700 kilometers with her grandchildren and husband for part of the way.
I really want to make like this trip with the kids, and that may be our last trip, and some of that teachings of our traditional way of life, I try to share with them that it's going to stay in their head. So if we pass on, that this last trip is a trip that they won't ever forget.
Sometimes you get windy up there, you can't come up. You can't, you gotta stay down there.
Unpredictable winds and water overflow can turn the trip deadly, especially for those without knowledge.
A lot of other families, they go to Old Crow by dog team. One of them said it took them 6 days. 6 times they have to set tent in order to get to Old Crow with dog team. It's a lot of work, but it wasn't work them days. That was our traditional way of life.
Carly Schogner, APTN National News, Tête Léger, Fort McPherson.
And on part 2, we'll look at how a decades-old tradition turned into an annual trek. Singer-songwriter Alyssa P. is our guest on an all-new episode of Face to Face tonight. She recently released her own rendition of Blondie's Heart of Glass, sung in Inuktitut. The cover song has garnered a lot of attention.
It's definitely much bigger than I expected. I just wanted to make sure that Inuit got it and they received it, and they also felt something precious about that song. So for sure Blondie shared it. they said they loved it, and Debbie Harry wrote to me, personal message to me that was more than I asked for. I mean, that was so nice of them.
And Alyssa has a whole album of cover songs in Inuktitut coming later this year. That's going to be good stuff. You can watch our full interview with Alyssa in less than 2 minutes' time. That is all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Tuesday. For news anytime, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. And tune in tomorrow, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, when Daryl puts reconciliation in sports in focus. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for being with us. Have a great day.